Hello everyone. It's your favorite assembly line worker. And today I want to take a moment and I guess sort of talk about Marx versus Smith on their conceptions of the division of labor, which you know just means that each person does a specific job, like a blacksmith or nail maker or weaver or something like that. And typically, when you talk about a product being made, they only do that job, and it's usually one part in the entire process of the assembly of whatever product that may be. So that's why I mentioned just now the assembly line, right? Each worker does a different thing in the step to let's say build a car or something like that, right? So yeah, and honestly, Adam Smith and Marx are remarkably similar, and this is actually the edition that I'm using. It's the modern library reprint of Edwin Canaan's, right? Yeah, that's what it says. I thought his name was Edward, but yeah, Edwin Canaan's 1904 edition of The Wealth of Nations. And like, yeah, to be honest, like, this is kind of where Marx kind of got the, of course his conception is a little different. Marx, when he talks about the labor theory of value and how it's labor that gives value to things, just like Smith, by the way. And once again, that's where Marx kind of got it from. Uh, Marx is more concerned with the social relations within that, how workers and bosses and stuff see each other, whereas, you know, Smith um is kind of less concerned about that. He's just concerned really about, how that affects the final value um of things in the abstract sense. And you can tell because he's doing a Giga Chad pose, so he doesn't need the Hegelian dialectic to help him out. Nah, um, but he actually does make the distinction between exchange value, um, which is like the value of something, um, that you can use as an exchange or to trade. Like, let's say, I don't know, the labor of a miner, right? Or the metal used to make his tools, and use value, which is typically more immediate, right? Food has a use value in that you need it to get energy and to live, right? Um, so, it's not like, well, I mean, certain types of food, like wheat, can have greater exchange value if they're used within, like, a process to make another product. Like, obviously, if you're making bread, you need wheat. And typically, through money, bigger companies, right, they can get, even though, or rather because they're spending so much money to industrially produce bread usually, um whoever their wheat supplier is can like give them a lower per unit price for whatever their standard unit of wheat is. He talks about like bushels and stuff and quarters of wheat. And again, Marx builds upon that by saying, well, like, wait a minute. Um, a lot of the times workers in the industrial age are now so removed from the use value of their own products, right? Because even if you sold what you had left over of, let's say, a coat, if you're a weaver and a spinner, or like people in your household do that, like, at least you made it yourself, right? You're not essentially selling your labor for money so that a capitalist can buy you the yarn or the cloth or the whatever needed to make that clothes, right? So you're one step removed from that. And as mechanization, like mechanical spinners and stuff like that, made that even more so, or industrial spinners and stuff, or and weaving machines made that the case even more so. You're like, it's not even, it's barely from your own hand. Yes, you're operating it, but the machine is doing most of the hard stuff, right? And so Marx introduces his concept of like alienation, where you become a cog in the machine. And where the division of labor comes into this is that, you know um yes, you could get extremely good at one thing, but it gets monotonous, doesn't it? If you're just there all day for 8 hours a day, or as was the case in Smith and Marx's time, more likely 10, 12, 14, even 16 hours a day, um, doing the same thing, you get incredibly good at it, okay, but like, what about all the other stuff humans can do, right? What about, if you decided to want to go and learn painting and stuff like that, and um do it at your, excuse me, own pace and whatnot? Well, um sucks to suck, I guess, cuz you're not going to be able to do that, right? But that's the thing. Marx argued um that if workers owned the means of production, if they owned their own tools and ran the places where they worked, you know, they wouldn't feel this alienation, because much like when I was in college learning about, this era of time, the like time of, I guess you could say, manufacturers, and like small scale industry. They called it the putting out system, right? Where like most stuff was handmade. You did what you could in a day. You didn't have a set schedule, right? And most of the stuff that you sold or put out into the market was your own surplus that usually came from your family or whatever, right? Um well, yeah, and he argued that like since the introduction of highly mechanized industry and like the very, I guess you could say, mechanical way of operating things on the schedule and stuff like that, that actually we've lost something, right? And like, once again, as I've said in various videos more recently, I do feel like that is the case, because how do you expect, for example, to pass down culture, pass down stories and stuff like that if you're too busy working and you can never see the members of your community, your family, and whatnot? And of course, Smith was like, no, the division of labor is great actually, because it increases industry and, helps increase the rate of production, the rate at which things get built, um which will eventually, with enough competition, um decrease prices and everyone will be happy, of course assuming that you don't have a monopolist that wants to get in there and basically take over all the business, which, as we know, was a thing, which he does address, to be fair, but he still thinks that like it it would be better to risk that than to not, than to constantly have restrictions on manufacture and stuff. And in a way, at least since Marx saw capitalism as a phase towards socialism, I mean, I think he would at least temporarily agree. Um, but yeah, the division of labor is also interesting to me, because there's one division of labor, and I haven't read on the origins of the state and the family and stuff. I will eventually, bros, but I mean, like, I'm juggling so much, but like, that is an interesting case of the division of labor to me, because within that, the family usually, eh, the women are the ones that pass stuff down and that do most of the quote unquote domestic labor. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I how do I want to say this? Um and that's probably the most important form of the division of labor, to be honest, because without that you really wouldn't, like, it's such a crucial part, you really wouldn't have people that would eventually grow up and do stuff. Now I will say I grew up uh in a sort of inverted situation to that, because most of the people that took care of me growing up were men, my brothers actually, but that itself was because both my parents had to work to keep a roof over our heads so many hours because we were migrants, right? But like, I do think that, you know alongside gender norms, because here's the thing, right? Like, people, when I say that I support the traditional family, I'm talking about the Latino extended family, where your first cousins, your second cousins, all the associated aunts and uncles, um and like, even if you lose contact, let's say, or something happens with one branch of of the family. You still have a whole bunch of others to rely on. Like, that's one of the things that I dislike about especially Anglo capitalism. Holy goodness, man. Like it's so alienating and so isolating. It goes just beyond, the way we we work, right? Um but I do think that if, we had a little bit more time to rest, we could honestly lessen the burden on women. And I'm really not saying that performatively. I mean that seriously, because right now my primary caregiver is my mother. Um but it used to be, as I've said before, my dad and brothers. But I also see in caregiving fields, it's mainly, at least, the actual workers, maybe not the administration. It's usually always African migrants or Latin American migrants, and I know because my mother is one of them, literally, and my father was also. But yeah, and as far as stopgap measures, since 2022, I've supported UBI as a way for women to get recompensed uh for their labor within the family, for that division of labor. I consider UBI to be a primarily um a woman's issue, because the primary demographic that it affects, in my opinion, because it's such a form of quote unquote unproductive labor that goes unsung, is um UBI in relation to childcare, which again mostly falls on. Although, to be honest, guys, once again, if we lived in a freer society, not bound so much by the division of labor, I do feel that many men would step up. I know that I've wanted, like, to be honest, guys, I know I talk about, like, oh, becoming a diplomat and, like, the humanities, but, like, I would love to be a stay-at-home dad, to be honest, and it's primarily because my dad, uh may he rest in peace, and my brothers took care of me for so long, so I had that modeled for me. And obviously I know I'm disabled, but I'm hoping that with a little bit of assistive tech and stuff like that, I can eventually make that happen. But also there are gender norms to overcome, so yeah. But anyway, guys, sorry I went on a little digression, but yeah, that's Marx versus Smith on the division of labor. Thank you very much. Bye.